watch out for that Mormon cricket plague they got going up that way. And I was like, what? And he's like, oh, and just kind of like walked off. Let me tell you about doing something called the Great Race with my dad in a rare Corvette. It is a cross-country vintage car rally that takes place every year, and it's usually about 2 weeks in duration. Back roads only, no interstate highways. This is a real, actual race, but it's the kind of rally that would make Ed Bolian pull his hair out because there's zero high speeds in it. You're usually doing at most 45, all back roads, like I said, and it is what's called a time speed distance rally. So you're targeting checkpoints to be there on time, not early, not late, and for each one of those things you get a penalty. So the scoring system kind of works like golf. You're trying to shoot for the lowest score possible. It is a precision race in old cars, and if you know anything about cars, precision and old cars don't necessarily go hand in hand. So it's a very, very interesting event. The Great Race, the first one was in 1983. It was created by a guy named Tom McRae in the spirit of the 1965 movie, The Great Race, starring Tony Curtis and Natalie Wood and like everybody else that was famous from the 60s. The races would take place generally coast to coast, but sometimes north to south, sometimes kind of Florida to California. It always takes a different path every year, but like I said, never on interstate highways. It's all back roads, and it is probably the coolest way to see the United States in a car made, before 1960 and only back roads. What could be cooler? When I was a kid, my dad and uncle did it. So growing up, I saw them doing this incredible event. It was televised on the History Channel. And, when you're young, you have cable, you see your dad on a thing that's on, the History Channel. I mean, that's wild. But one thing that always stood out to me was everybody was absolutely exhausted. And it turns out when I got to do it, when I believe turned 15, I knew exactly why. So the first time I ever got to do the Great Race, we were driving a 1954 Corvette. If you know anything about Corvettes, you'll know that's the first full production year. Now everybody will say, well, 53 was. But in 1953, they only made 300 Corvettes, and they were all white, and they were all allocated. They were all placed around the country and given strategically to people to kind of spread awareness and make people aware and excited about the Corvette. But in 1954, a guy could buy one. And this was, like I said, the first full production year. And by full production, I mean they made about 4,000 of them. So still not a very high production car, but a very, very cool car. It is, without a doubt, probably the most beautiful design I've seen. A lot of people would say it's a Jaguar XKE, but I think if you see a 53, 54 Corvette in person, it is nothing but style. It is style first and everything else fifth. It is insane how they got this to actually be in production. It is Harley Earl's brainchild, running and driving. Style took such a priority that even the layout of the gauges on the dash don't make a lot of sense. It's just the way they look, but the oil pressure gauge is so far over that you have to lean over to look at it. And I mean, who in their right mind would put that, all the way over there? But it didn't matter. It looked good. What we were working with then is a car with no door handles, no windows. They only have drop-in like plastic windows. And that is a rolling piece of museum history. Some of the people that are on the Great Race, this is no small production. This was a major, major event, especially in the early 2000s. The grand prize for the winner was $250,000. And real big, serious race teams were doing this. Roush had teams, several. And I don't just mean he had teams. Jack himself would go and race. Many teams with semi-trailers and like teams of 30 people would go. But there were people like me and my dad who would do it, just the two of us, no support crew, everything that we needed for those 2 weeks, tools, clothes, everything in the car. And part of that meant entering what was called the Roadster class. So there was a special class within the Great Race for people without roofs. So one of the cool things, kind of backtracking here, about the Great Race were all of the variety of cars you got going on there. With the cutoff period of newest car you could have being 1954, you saw a lot of cool stuff. There was actually a ton of cool cars in there, not just Model A's. But because of these big teams, there were also a lot of actual real-life Indy cars from the 30s and 20s that people had made street legal just to bring on the Great Race. And it was the coolest thing in the world. Corky Coker, another big name in the vintage car scene of Coker Tire, had the real Buick Schaefer 8 from the 30s. It's a straight 8 Buick Indy car. And it just is all 8 cylinders right there, exhaust coming straight back and right by his arm. Sounded so cool. And the car was so cool looking. And we're right there with them. You know, that's the roadster class. You know, they also didn't have roofs. And part of driving across the country for 2 weeks was you're in the elements. It's gonna rain. There were no stoppages for the race. It didn't matter whether it was snowing, raining, a sandstorm, you're doing it. A time, speed, distance race, like I said, again, a lot of people still see old cars with stickers and they're like, cool, you guys are going from here to here as fast as you can, right? No, you're following very specific instructions to get to checkpoints that, again, you don't know where they are, to hit times that you don't know what they are as accurately as possible. A day in the Great Race looked like this. You wake up about 6 a.m. in a miscellaneous hotel you often don't remember. You try to grab whatever food you can and you try to get it together and you try to get out and wait in line to receive your instruction packet. Once you get that, there's an official there that takes any electronics you have, bags them, seals them, because you're not allowed to have them for the rest of the day. So from then on out, you're kind of on the clock. And when you get your instruction packet, sometimes it's very thick, sometimes it's not, and you just get to work. From then on out, you're on the move. You start at the hotel and you have a speedometer calibration period that leads you up to the starting line. And by starting line, I mean whatever road sign they decided was the start line for that day. Sounds pretty easy, but if you look at the instructions, they are just these little, almost childishly iconic based things in a small grid. And you just kind of go, well, this seems pretty simple. But there's no, you don't get distances in between the events. So you just get on the highway, it just says like, okay, right turn out of the hotel, okay, left turn. And it's literally just like this weird little arrow. You're like, okay. And in the beginning, you see a wad of cars, so it's okay. Once you get out to the starting line though, if you can find it, because some people get separated on the calibration period, you're definitely on the clock. Each car is separated by a minute, you're supposed to be. You do have a starting time, and it's usually something weird, like car number 53, which was us, your start time is 8:07 and 57 seconds. And so you'd make sure, whether anybody else was starting on time or not, that you were up at that sign at 8:07, 57 seconds, and you had your first instruction and you had your first set speed. And so time would come and you'd hit it. And it was not a gentle acceleration. It's a race. So yes, you're only going 35, but it's a all-out 35 in a 54 Corvette, and which takes a little bit longer than a modern car, so it does seem exciting. And once you're there, you're like, okay, cool, we're here. And from there on out, it's nothing but intense focus on both the navigator's part and the driver's part, because old cars wander around. You're not on radial tires, you're on bias plies here, and he's got to watch his speed be pegged on 35 and not let it wander at all until whatever the next instruction is. Sometimes it's a turn, sometimes it's just this arbitrary speed change. And the speed change could be at another sign. Again, you're just going down these weird iconic-based instructions, and you're like, what? It looks like hieroglyphs when you first look at it. And if you've ever seen a 54 Corvette, the windshield, again, style first, is very low. Even a pretty short person's head is going to stick out above the windshield a good deal. So you're feeling it. There's none of this side window stuff where it prevents the air from whipping in either. I mean, the windshield there is a formality, and that's it. So you start out in the morning at like a 55-degree temperature. You're kind of chilly, whatever. Day warms up, and you head into the mountains. And same kind of deal. You're now in the mountains, and now you've got distractingly beautiful scenery, but you're looking for railroad crossing sign, or, so you see the stuff, but you're not fully present. I think I'm the only person who's maybe seen all of the United States from a back road, and I'd be like, pretty sure it was pretty. Yeah, I think, seem to remember that, but I was really focused on calculating times and doing quick math and making sure we were good to go for the next thing. Time rolls on, and so does weather. And sometimes it comes up very quickly. And because when I did it, it was 2005, 2006, and because you weren't allowed to have phones, you either knew the weather was coming or you didn't. And the way weather rolls in the mountains is it comes up fast. More than once, I have been caught up in the rain with my dad on the clock, no top in sight, no windows to roll up. You're just in it. And like I said, and no windshield to speak of, and you're on the clock. And the thing is if you ask any motorcyclist who's ever been caught in the rain, they say usually, oh, the raindrops feel like, bee stings. And that's fairly accurate. Obviously I had a windshield to help some of that, but I mean, it's still whipping in even at 35 or 40 miles an hour. The time when it's very unfortunate is when it hails, and it has happened more than once. And I'll tell you what, an experience that I don't think many people have had, and I'll go out on a limb here, I don't think anybody else has had, is being in a 1954 Corvette in the hail, still driving. And I'll tell you what, if raindrops feel like bee stings, pea-sized hail at 40 miles an hour feels like wasps and rocks at the same time. And there's nothing you can do. You can't stop. Everybody else is dealing with it too. And even though you're thinking, oh my gosh, how can it get any worse than this? You can hear the roar of hail on the fiberglass body, and you're just still going, I hope, and you're trying to block yourself, and it's inescapable. But that's racing. So you've been through that. You go to a lunch stop. And the cool thing about this is you always stop at these towns that, I honestly, unfortunately, couldn't tell you a lot of the names, but this is the biggest thing that has happened to these towns in I don't know how many years. They know it's coming. The officials let them know we're coming, and they make a thing of it. They're like, please remember us. Like, they have a competition for best lunch stop, best this. So these little towns put out a show for you. So after your lunch break, you get to head back out on the road, and definitely towards the end of the race, that often got to be the desert. And guess what's in the desert when you're in an open car? Nothing. And you get to, these town people are going, oh, where are you going? Well, Tonopah, Nevada. And I go, oh, good luck with that. And that's it. And you're already at a not big town. And that's it for towns between you and your next stop. And you're now in the desert, open top. It's hotter than you can imagine. And no, the flow of air going over you is not enough to cool you down. It does not counteract the sun beating down on you. And I distinctly remember at one of the final coffee breaks before going into the last stretch and the hottest part of the day, somebody did ask, where are you headed? I was like, oh, I believe Tonopah, Nevada. And sometimes I wouldn't know. I'd just be like, I don't know, one of these towns. And the guy said, oh, yeah, watch out for that Mormon cricket plague they got going up that way. And I was like, what? And he's like, oh. And just kind of like walked off. And I remember coming back to my dad being like, this guy said something about a Mormon cricket, and he used the word plague, which is never good. And I was like, I don't know what that means, and I also don't know what we're supposed to do about it, but, I guess we have that tip. Hours went on, and I was like, well, whatever that was probably just some guy scared me because I was a younger guy on the road. But we got kind of into one of those, if you've ever seen those pictures of the highway where you come over a hill and then you go back down and it's straight almost infinitely before it goes up into another hill, around a corner. We got to one of those, and I remember the double line in the middle down the way disappeared. The double yellow just was gone. I was like, fresh pavement. That was the Mormon cricket plague. And what they had done is they gathered on the asphalt because it was hot, and they coated it. And you just had to go through them. And it was millions upon millions of crickets, just, it was a nightmarish situation. And coming into the car, I'll never forget it, and then you're still going, I hope the sign doesn't come up. This is a big problem. You're worried about it. They're, coating the radiator. I've never even heard of it. Still, I don't know how often plagues happen. At least maybe not in my area, But there are times you go from getting hailed on to having a nice barbecue lunch to running through a sea of Mormon crickets, apparently. You just can't get that experience on any other kind of event. Usually about 120 cars started the event, I'll say that. But being this is a vintage car rally, I would say 60 to 80 finish. And in fact, they're saying, I'm not sure if it still is, it used to be the great race, to finish is to win. And I wholeheartedly believe that. Even if you didn't know about having to change your speed, or if you just followed the instructions and you survived that 2-week period through all of the different environments, through all the heat and all the elevation change, and you were able to keep whatever you were driving going for 2 weeks, 8 hours a day, that is a victory. And you have to feel good about that. And I think everybody did.